Good afternoon, everyone. Who is awake after lunch? All right, get more coffee. So welcome to my session, GitHub and Azure Better Together. I am April Edwards. I formerly was a Microsoft full-time employee. I've now joined GitHub as of March of this year. So I moved over to kind of join up the GitHub and Azure story. I've been in the ops space. I've been in the development space. I worked in engineering at Microsoft. I've done lots of things in my 24-year career. But I love being here in Copenhagen. And I was here 7 years ago doing the Ironman triathlon that occurred last weekend, 7 years ago. Beautiful triathlon, beautiful city, lots of jellyfish, by the way. Can you guys, get rid of those next time? But the thing about Ironmans is you get to see a city on a bike and a swim and a run. But you're so tired in an Ironman that when you're on your fourth run loop of the city, you look up and go, there's the Prince's Castle thing right there, but you didn't see it the other time because you're so exhausted. But beautiful city, beautiful crowds. So I've seen some pretty unique parts of the city. So it's good to be back here without an Ironman this time. But we're going to talk about GitHub and Azure. But before we do that, we're going to be a little bit interactive. I know it's post-lunch. I want to ask you how you would define DevOps. Damo, you don't get to answer. You can go ahead and shout it out. We're all friends. Okay. Developer and operations together. Anyone else? Analyze, plan, and structure again in a cycle. Yep. Okay. We're going to actually define DevOps. Now, this is from a former Microsoft colleague and a legend, Donovan Brown. But we're going to level set because we're going to talk about delivering some very specific things in a minute. So we're going to define DevOps as the union of people, process, and products to deliver continuous delivery of value to our end users. Now, I want to focus on this word value because I'm going to talk about GitHub and I'm going to talk about Azure. And I'm going to talk about the other clouds as well, because the reality is we're all using other clouds. But what value are we delivering? Whether we're in operational space or we're in the development space, what are we delivering together? To give you a really good example, we're going to talk about tooling today, but it's the culture change. And for any of you that saw my talk last night, I talked about code spaces and GitHub CoPilot. But I talked about the culture changes that need to happen. We talk about the practices we need to instill in our organizations. Because the human element is the hardest part of these changes in our organizations. We can talk about tooling, and we've all been there, right? We've all invested in a tool, whether that's GitHub, whether that's Azure, but it doesn't work until the people buy into it and can actually change some of their behaviors to deliver those things to the cloud. So when we talk about DevOps and talk about the tooling side of it, there's a lot of choices. And the world is a very, very messy place. And we can put these tools in, and all of us here can sit there and go, yep, I've integrated that tool, I've integrated that tool. And having worked on the Microsoft side, I worked a lot with Azure DevOps. And I worked with customers going, how do I integrate this into Azure DevOps? How do I make this work? Now I'm sitting here on the GitHub side going, how do I integrate all these tools we've already invested in, because we don't want to spend any more money, into GitHub and into the platform? Now, we have a special guest in the back named Martin. Martin wanted to see his icon, his image up here. There you go, Martin. Honeycomb does all the things, apparently. There you go. You owe me one now. But this is where GitHub's stepping in and going, we want to deliver a platform to you as a developer to build, scale, and deliver secure software. Okay? We don't want to just be source control. How many of you used GitHub back in 2010-ish, 2014? Right? Very different than what it is today. It was a source control platform with Git, and that was it. It was vanilla. But we're not the same anymore. We're a whole platform to deliver that end-to-end from that whole DevOps lifecycle to help you deliver value, but to do it securely. So we use this phrase in DevOps called shifting left. Now, shifting left's important. We want to do things early and often, and we want to fail fast. Why? Because the cost of the organization that it will happen, the cost that will incur to our organizations when we do have a breach. We've all had an outage and we've all had a breach, but we need to prevent it. So a lot of things we talk about today, when we talk about AI, we talk about all this tooling, it's bringing these tools closer to the developer experience, because we know from statistical fact, from the numbers, that it's more cost effective to hit these things on the head from the developer side. But we all make mistakes. How many of you have heard of Uber? Yeah? How many of you know about their latest breach? One person. All right, couple people. They put a password in a plain text file, more specifically a PowerShell script, in their GitHub repository. Never put a password in your repository. Never do it. All right? A password lives forever. It's not just for Christmas. So when they put this password into the repository, people used social engineering to gain access to that repository, and that password was exposed. Getting access to you the end user and your data. What was that value to the end user? What was that impact to the organization? We lost trust in Uber, not that we really had any, because they had another outage, they had another breach in 2017, costing them millions and millions of dollars. The exact same thing. They put a password in a plain text file. So how do we prevent these things from happening more early and more often? So being a high-performing DevOps organization, we talk about the culture changes and all these things, but we can bring in hard statistical numbers that prove that high-performing DevOps organizations bring value to your organization. So when we talk about the cultural change, when we talk about these toolings we're implementing, we need analytics and data to bring back to our business owners to say, we're doing all these great things. Not only are we more secure, how are we more secure? We're doing more frequent deployments. We know that high-performing organizations can show that they're doing more frequent deployments. We know they have faster time from commit to deploy, and we know that they can recover from incidences faster because you are going to have an outage. While I'm going to talk about Azure, we have outages. GCP has them, AWS has them, and your on-prem data center is going to have them. We can't get away from that experience, unfortunately. So what does secure software development look like with GitHub and Azure together? First of all, we want to secure our development environment, and that's the developer experience. But we don't want to take the developer out of the equation. We don't want to lock them down. We want to give you enablement to do more. We need to embed security in the developer workflow from day one. And we need to bridge that divide between the development teams and your operational teams and your security teams. Every single project I've ever worked on, it's been the security person raising their hand going, it's not secure enough, we can't proceed. How many of you have been there? Every single time. So we need to bring those people in on day zero. Get them included in the conversation, start talking security, but making sure we start secure and we stay secure. So what does this look like in the GitHub and Azure space? We've integrated a lot of tools. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say this. Microsoft acquired GitHub about five and a half years ago. And while we are very much independent organizations, we very much intertwine our tools together a lot. And this is a really good visual for that. So from the development side, it matters. Where do you write your code? Are you writing your code in Notepad++? If anyone says yes, there's the door. No, I'm kidding. I still have customers writing code in Notepad++. Are you doing things in code spaces? Are you putting your code in safe places? Whether that is a GitHub repository or an Azure repo. Are you then deploying your code with CI/CD actions? Are you hooking in Azure Active Directory into your authentication mechanisms? Are you configuring your apps in the right way? Are you using things like monitoring from day one? Are you using the correct monitoring from day one? Are you using secure templates? Are you doing infrastructure as code? How many of you still deploy things, point-clicky things? All right, we'll work on you. We'll work on you. ClickOps, we got ClickOps in the front. But are we putting policy into our workflows to know what we're deploying before we deploy it? So we've also hooked in GitHub Advanced Security, which not only does things on the GitHub platform, but will address it from the developer side. We're going to talk about some of these so we can scan our code and find those passwords. Obviously, we need to have a chat with Uber about their code scanning. So code scanning will expose those passwords and prevent that from getting to our production level environments. Then we have secret scanning. We need to know where we put secrets. We've all done it, right? We've put a password somewhere where we shouldn't have. And dependency scanning. How many of you consume open source in your organizations today? Quite a few of you. I think the actual statistic that GitHub talks about is about 90% of organizations consume or open source software in their production level code. That's a high number. So if you're using all these dependencies, how do you manage it? How do you know when there's any kind of security breach or what's going on? So we're going to look at some of that today. And then how are we deploying things? Now, I'm going to use a containerized application today using Azure Container Registry. The really cool thing, and this is why I'm an Azure fan, I'm not allowed to say as a GitHub employee, as my GitHub fellows are there. The reason why I love Azure Container Registry is because I can hook in other monitoring tools that show me the other clouds. I can see what's going on in AWS and GCP. I have a full pane of glass experience from an Azure portal, which is pretty cool. So let's talk about where security fits in the development lifecycle. The moment your developers clone their code is exactly when this begins. So what kind of machine they're working on. We all work from home pretty much. Who's in your house? Most of you probably have children or family members. Who's accessing your laptop? Do you let your kids use your laptop? That's something organizations have to consider. But then how do we lock down our own laptops and our devices so that they are secure? So having worked with a lot of customers in engineering, we were build with, code with customers. We'd engage on a new project, and always getting started was hard. And each person on the team had a very different laptop. I'm working off a Windows Surface device because I love my Windows Surface device. I do own a Mac. It's a very nice brick that sits in my office. I use it on occasion to update and collect dust, really. But I've always worked on engineering teams where we're about 50% PCs and 50% Macs, just because of personal preference. And then I actually used to have a manager that worked on a Linux device because he just loved his Linux machines. So we had 3 different devices we were working on in one single project, plus the customer devices. We all had different development environments. So from an organizational point of view, you have to think about how you secure that and how you secure those devices. The same customer that I talked to you about using Notepad++, still use Notepad++. And I remember when we were working on this customer project getting started, they didn't believe in VS Code. They didn't feel it was an enterprise level product. And then when we were writing code and they were using Notepad++, I remember one guy not tapping me on the shoulder one day. He goes, April, I can't find this issue. We were writing something in Terraform with infrastructure as code. And I'm like, OK, let me see. And I pulled up in my branch on my machine in my IDE, Visual Studio Code. I'm like, oh, it's right here. He goes, well, how'd you find that? I said, well, VS Code has extensions that help me write better code. It's helping me find that error, except for the 4 hours it took him. It took me like 10 seconds. That matters, right, when we're writing and delivering code. But then my environment was different than his. So how do we level set that? How do we level set the environment so we're not saying it worked on my machine? So when we commit our code, we need to start thinking about, are we analyzing our code? So we're going to look at some pipeline actions today to run some unit tests. Are you running unit tests on your code? Are you doing credential scanning, dependency management, all these things before your code gets to production? You have to be doing all these things in that commit phase. Then when we deploy our code, what are we doing? Are we using infrastructure as code, policy as code? So back when I started working with computers, we didn't have GUIs to point and click. We didn't have ClickOps. Everything was done on a CLI. Now we're going back to that. We're going back to everything being as code now. So even though people are working in the operational space, we're going back to writing things as code into scripts. Less of the pointy, clicky stuff. And because we can automate it, we can make it repeatable. Then how do we configure that for the cloud? How do we do kind of security testing, security acceptance tests in the cloud? And then most importantly, how do we operate and monitor? So I was working with a UK customer one day, and they're like, we're doing all the DevOps. We're doing all the things. Can you have a look at what we're doing? I was like, yeah, sure. And they were doing all the things, except they weren't monitoring what they were doing. So I was like, well, how do you know what success you're having? And how do you know what to fix? So they were going, oh, yeah, that's a good idea. So we hooked in monitoring. So monitoring then told us what was going wrong and when, and we could be a little bit more proactive. And then we knew what to address in the next sprint cycle. So security is literally going to start from day 0 and go all through that. So we're going to talk about, I'm going to talk a little bit about GitHub Enterprise and all the things that make it up. Now, this is the last slide, and then we're going to go into a really cool demo, because everyone likes a demo, right? All right. So when we talk about collaboration, we have tons of tools at GitHub. One thing I do is I hook all my GitHub repositories into my Teams access. So I get notifications in a Teams channel that says, right, I've got a PR, I've got a notification, and I get an email. But my email is like a black hole, so I just ignore it and put it into a folder. But I have that ability. Or I can hook it into Slack. I can be notified in Slack and Teams if I want. But that's part of the collaboration piece. And why is that important? Not from a developer point of view, but even like a product owner point of view. Because if you're notifying them that, let's say, a system's gone down, and someone's tapping on your shoulder and going, excuse me, when do you get our infrastructure back up? When is this code going to work? When's this feature going to go out? You always get those questions, and those things delay us in our day-to-day role. But if we can add that collaboration piece in so they have visibility into what we're doing, that enables them to go, OK, I see that April's opened up a pull request. That code's working. They're running the tests. We know we're rolling. We're on the right path. That's good. We'll have our systems up soon. That helps with the collaboration piece. But we're all humans, right? And we all have different backgrounds. We're all different ages. So even though I'm an American, I live in England. And I speak really bad British English. But we have different cultures in that same country. And even here in Europe, we speak different forms of English. And we all are probably working on teams that are very, very diverse. Because England is absolutely a melting pot, which is why I love it, which is also why I love living in Europe. Because, you know, nobody's the same. But that makes a problem for collaboration, right? We speak different things. We mean different things. So how do we level set that a little bit? And there's ways we can do that with collaboration. So we have things like GitHub discussions. So you can have that water cooler kind of chat. You can have communication and issues. There's all sorts of tools that we're going to see that will help us communicate throughout. Then how do we automate? When people ask me what to automate in their projects, automate everything. Now, we know that's not feasible, but we try to automate all the things. Why? Because we're humans and we make mistakes. Because we put passwords in plain text files. And we need to make things repeatable and easy to redeploy. But we need to secure everything by design. So we have built security in from day 1. Azure does the exact same thing. And what I like to tell people is it's like a lock and a key. We give you the pieces to secure it. You have to enable it. So we're going to look at ways we can enable security in our repository from day 1. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the demo because you've seen enough of the slides. All right, can everyone see that? Is everyone okay with dark mode? Good. Does anyone know why developers write code in dark mode? You two, you guys don't get to answer. Because light mode attracts the bugs. Sorry, my one really bad joke. I do like to ask genuinely if people prefer light mode, but I struggle with light mode. Like, I'm working in light mode, I'm like, I literally can't find the things that I know to find because I look at the colors that I'm used to working in. So I just want to check. Right, so this is my repository. It is public. Please don't start messing with my code while I'm doing my demo, but this is something you can look at. You can look at these actions. You can look at the configuration. It gives you all the visibility to do stuff. So first thing I want to do is I have my repository. I want to write some code. Now, I'm on a PC. Let's say I'm collaborating with any of you, and you're on a Mac. We got to get set up, right? Brand new repository, net new project. How long does it take you to get started on a net new project usually? Hours, days, weeks, months, a while, forever, too many cups of coffee. I've been started on projects taking weeks to get access to things. And we get started on a project and we're going, oh, I need this package installed. I need NPM installed. I need this version. I need that version. That's the hardest part of getting started on a project. So in this repository, I have what's called a dev container at my top level folder. My dev container contains everything you need to get started in a pretty set development environment. So we're going to run through how that works in a second. So I have my code here, and where I'd normally just run everything locally, I would go ahead and run that locally on my machine, get it set up. I'd have all these things to get started, and we don't have that kind of time today. So I'm going to go ahead and spin up a GitHub code space. A GitHub code space, I believe Damien went into it in really good depth on his session earlier. Okay, he didn't. Okay, we'll go into a little bit more. Fine. A GitHub code space is a containerized environment in the cloud. It's a secure development environment. I'm running this from my browser. So if my laptop dies, I could take any one of your laptops and still run my demo. So I can set what packages need to be installed to get going real quickly, and I can do all sorts of configurations around it. So if I click on the 3 hamburger little button here, I can do a new code space with an option. We're going to let that run. When that runs, I can choose what branch to run my code off of. I can also do a default dev container configuration. Now, the project default will be that dev container file that I've put into my project. If you don't have one enabled, it will spit one up. I'm going to go ahead and deploy this in Europe West. There are a few other regions that you can deploy these from. Southeast Asia, US East, US West. More regions are coming, all right? That is coming down the pipeline. The other really cool thing is the machine type. I can choose how much compute I want to run on my code space. Now, why does this matter? Because that same customer that uses Notepad++ and locked all their developers out of admin access gave their developers the worst possible machines ever. But we always get that, right? We always get the worst machine. They're like, oh, here, let me blow off the dust and give you whatever I found in the closet. So I don't have enough compute to run my tests locally. My machine heaves. My machine heaves all the time because it's a Windows device, right? It blue screens. That's like its favorite thing to do. But I still love it. I can't let go of it. So, you know, there's no changing my mind on that. But I can change my compute. So when you have a GitHub Enterprise account, you can set the standard. So if I'm going to choose a 2-core, 4 gig of RAM code space, I can scale this up. So I'm paying for what I need when I use it. Now, these are hosted in Azure. And I can go ahead and create that code space. So while that is creating, it's going to run from my dev container file and do all the prereqs of what I need to get going. If we're using a net new project, we can configure this dev container. We can tell people what they need to have in it, and it would have it pre-set up, which is pretty cool. So then I don't have to worry about which device everyone's on. They have all the packages, what versions, saves tons of time. Now, if I have a lot of packages in my requirements, and this dev container build takes a while, maybe it takes more than 2 minutes, use a pre-build. Pre-build will set what those pre-configured options are a lot faster. The other thing I can do that I think is really fun is share a deep link. So what does that mean? If I go into my repository here, I have a README, as every good developer does. And I've put links into my README. So anyone gets started on my project doesn't have to go through the pointy-clicky things. They can just click on this link. They can just either do one of these, spin me up on a GitHub code space, or I like the pretty button where it says open in a GitHub code space. It'll open up that code space with that dev container config. That's all my team has to do. It has all the compute they need and everything else. So I've already given them that secure environment. So if I go back to my code space, we can see that it's setting itself up. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in for you. If any time you all can't see, just shout, please. Now, in my GitHub code space, this looks identical to VS Code, because it is. I have my settings synced from Visual Studio Code into my code space. All right? I'm going to have to do one configuration thing in a minute, so bear with me. I will have to unplug, because I do have to authenticate, because I have a little Azure auth issue. Even when you work for Microsoft and GitHub, you still get auth issues. It's the fun. We can't escape them either. So this is all loaded, so we're good to go. So this looks like my Visual Studio Code experience, has everything I need. I have a couple things in here that I want to talk about. So we have GitHub CoPilot chat loaded up. We're not going to use it unless you guys all really want to see it, but I think Damien covered it earlier. Oh, you didn't cover it? Oh, man. This is not teamwork, buddy. All right. We might do some GitHub CoPilot chat if you all want to look at it, but we're going to focus on some other things. Oh, Scott did. Oh, yeah, he did a little bit. Yeah, we could do some. We'll see. What was I looking at? Oh, the Azure button. I'm just going to unplug for 1 second while this authenticates, because I have to re-authenticate this through. So please bear with me. I'm not going to show you all my password. As much as I like you all, it's not going to happen. Good. All right, you all can see that now. Yep, cool. Sorry, I had to re-auth that through. Now, why does it matter that I can see my Azure resources? Context switching. This is why I love a code space. Everything we're going to do today is in this code space. There's a few things we're going to do outside of it because visually it looks better, but I don't need to leave this code space. So as I'm getting older in my career, I find context switching is much harder. I spend a lot of my day in meetings. I spend a lot of my day in just, trying to not actually write code. Like, that's the reality of a developer, right? We are doing other things in our organization. So when I'm actually getting that focus time to write code, I don't want to leave that space. That's really important for me. And for me, that really helps. So I am using GitHub CoPilot chat to search for the answers to my code. I'm absolutely looking at my Azure resources from this control panel, and I'm going to show you how we're going to look at our GitHub Actions in a minute as well. So I have visibility into what's going on into my Azure portal. From here, I can see all the things I have loaded. And we have 3 Azure web apps here that we're going to start playing with in a minute. Let's see if it'll let me make that a little bit bigger. See if it loads. So I can see these app services here. I can focus in on them because these are the 3 that we're going to be deploying to in a minute. We're going to be deploying some live code, so hopefully the demo gods are with me. So in my repository, I do have to actually look at my issues. Why? Because I've written one for you all where we're going to change our website for the NDC conference. We're going to make some live changes to my website. What does my website look like? It's really simple. It just says welcome. All right? But we want to go ahead and change this website for the conference. We're going to all do it together. So I've opened up an issue. So anytime I need to communicate to my team, again, this communication thing, I open up an issue. I can track what's happening. And through that issue, I can track everything that's going on. The other cool thing is I have tasks listed in my issue. Because I'm not just doing one thing usually. I'm usually doing multiple things. So I can break this up into multiple tasks. So I can go ahead and look at these tasks and say, well, I need to architect a new web layout. I need to change our code, and I need to create some documentation, and everybody loves documentation. Then I need to ship it and collect some metrics. So I've added some tasks into this, and we're ready to change some code. So I go into my GitHub code spaces again, and let's look at our actual source code. So this is a really simple website that we just saw. I called it, what did I say? Welcome. So we're going to go ahead and change this. Sorry, I'm trying to zoom in for you all. Try to zoom. So who has a suggestion of what we should change this to? Hi, Copenhagen. All right, I like it. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to come off my main branch and create a new branch like a good developer. We need to automate that. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and save these changes within our GitHub code space. And we can see on the left-hand side here, the source control tab shows us that we've made a change. Pretty simple. We've all been here. We're going to change our welcome message. We're going to commit our code. And we're going to go ahead and publish our branch from here. I can actually create a pull request at the exact same time from in the code space. My exact same experience that I have from Visual Studio Code. Yeah, let's go ahead and create a pull request. And as I do that, I have the full visibility here on the left-hand side for the extension. So I can see what files were changed. I've made a commit. I can see what files were changed in that commit, and then I can see the GitHub pull request. I can go ahead and make changes here, which is pretty cool. So yeah, let's see if I can tag my issue. I can't. So I actually don't have to leave what's happening now. And I actually have this other pane pull up on the right-hand side that shows me what's happening, and I can see all the files that are changed, and we have visibility, right? We want traceability in a DevOps team. I'm actually just going to go into our changes here and check out what the pull request looks like. And as I kick off this pull request, I've automated a bunch of things. I like automating everything. Why? Because it helps me from doing stupid things. I think there was a really good quote. We do things, I think the most lethal things are computers, handguns, and tequila, I think was the official quote. So I'm going to automate things. Every time I create a pull request, I'm running 3 checks. The first thing I'm running is a CodeQL analysis. We're going to go through what that is in a minute. The second thing I'm going to do, I am running Terraform plan against my infrastructure as code. That's not really pertinent to what we're doing today, but it does. Every time I create a pull request, it runs because my infrastructure and my code are dependent upon each other. And we can always have that long debate of, do I put my infrastructure's code next to my actual source code? I do, because they are dependent. So that is why I run that. So as this is running a deploy environment here, we can see CodeQL is still running. Let's see what the actions are actually doing. So the CodeQL is still running. We'll give that a second to hopefully not fail. So I've gone ahead and I've built and pushed our code. So the first thing I do is every time I open up a pull request, I'm going to run some tests. And people always ask, I had some questions last night about, in a GitHub code space, can you run tests? Absolutely. And if you run out of compute because you're using so much compute in your tests, it will actually ask you to scale that up. But I actually run my tests with GitHub Actions. The reason why I do that is it's more of a behavior thing. So I worked on an engineering team with a junior engineer who, great human, hated testing her code before she pushed up her PR. It was a team rule. We had to test our code locally. She never did it. She's like, oh yeah, I just didn't. So how do you change that? How do you change that behavior? That's really hard. No matter how many times we told her, we said, look, you got to test your code. She's like, yeah, whatever. It just wasn't important to her. She didn't understand the importance no matter us explaining it, showing her. So we created actions so that every time that PR was open, it had to run those tests initially. And that's exactly why I'm doing it here. So the first step when I push my code up is I'm building an image. We can see the steps here. First thing I'm doing is I'm logging into Azure, okay? And I'm creating an Azure container. I'm logging into my Azure container registry. I'm building my code, and I'm pushing it to that Azure container registry. And then after I build it, I'm actually running some tests. Now, I did have Microsoft Defender hooked in. I had to take it out because they've changed some of the licensing models. So I do apologize, but that was supposed to run in this as well. But I'm go ahead and actually I am scanning my image for vulnerability. Sorry, it did run. So I'm running tests on my code. I'm building it to an image. It passed all the tests. Everything's green. It can go to my Azure Container Registry, and then it's ready for the next step, and I can put in some safety measures. So if I look at the scanning code here, I do see that there are some issues in my, I have some severe vulnerabilities in my package, but it didn't fail my pipeline. That's interesting. I'll have to look into that. Right, bug report for that. So then I put a gate here on my test environment. Why do I put in a gate? Because I don't want it to proceed immediately. So in my testing environment here, I need a human review. So we can automate all the things. I can automate this whole process, but I want to protect my production environment. So I'm deploying to a test environment first, and I need to have it reviewed. We still need humans. In the world of AI and automation, we still need humans to review. And so many organizations I work with need this. They need to be able to run that test environment, see what's going on, and make those changes. So if I open the deploy to test button here in my actions workflow, I need to review my pending deployment. Now I'm going to try and improve this from my phone. Let's see how this goes. Now, the reason why I'm trying to do it from my phone is how many of you walk away from your machine when you're running a pipeline and go get a cup of coffee? Then I walk the dog, I get distracted. So I'm trying to load this on here. It's not loading. That's okay. So I can review this pending deployment. Now, I could just click the button, but I actually want to put visual eyes on the change on my website. So this is the actual resource in Azure here. I'm going to click on it. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't actually deploy it to my test environment. Sorry, my bad. So it needs to go to test. So it's built and deployed my image, sorry, to the Azure Container Registry. Now I want to go to my test environment. So it's all the green check marks. We hit yes, and we're going to say ship it. And we're going to approve and deploy this. Now it will then continue. So when I go to approve and deploy this, I've added another step, a manual step, and it's going to run through all the tasks. It's just pulling a runner up. So while that's running and deploying to our test environment, let's go through the CodeQL workflow that ran. The CodeQL workflow is, it's analyzing my code that's in my repository. It's running the analysis tool on it, and then it's spitting it out. So it sees that I have JavaScript in my code, and it automatically picks it up and runs that. Now, how does it do that? So if I go into the security setting of GitHub in my repository, all I need to do is enable it. We can see here CodeQL analysis on my screen. I can add in third-party tools. So I've already enabled it. I can view my last scan log. I can view my code scanning alerts. I can actually view my CodeQL configuration. Let's go ahead and pull this in. So it's automatically picked up JavaScript in my code. It supports C#, Golang, Ruby, etc. And I can change the query suites. I can do the scan events. I can stop if my pipeline fails this. Everything has to stop and I have to rebuild my code. So when I worked with the Azure DevOps product group, they ran 50,000 unit tests every single pull request. And you had to have all green before proceeding. So if my code fails this CodeQL scan, I cannot proceed. So that's one of the requirements for that PR to go through. So when I go ahead and set up CodeQL, it automatically gives me the CodeQL output. So I'm just going to go ahead and go to the actions for it, and we will look at what the workflow is doing. Where is, they've moved the button. Damien, where did they move the button to? They've actually moved the workflow button on me. Okay, we're not going to look at that. All right. So now that I've enabled this, the CodeQL is going to look for any secrets or any kind of issues in my repository itself. Now, I can see security advisories as well. So when I look at the code scanning button here, there's no code scanning alerts. It does show that I can add tools as well, but I have the CodeQL running. Now, more importantly, I want to run secret scanning. I don't have any secrets in this repository. Sometimes I plant secrets in here to show it. I don't have any today, but I might try to push one up in just a moment, actually. The other thing is Dependabot. We talked about dependencies, right? I have none in here. I don't have a lot of packages that I'm consuming, but it will set in here and it'll open up a pull request every time it pulls a dependency alert. So I can get an issue open, and I can determine whether I want to open up a pull request, resolve it, if it's a high priority, medium, or low priority request. And I can see those all from here. If I'm actually in my, I'm just going to make this a little bit smaller. If I'm in my code spaces here, and I want to look at some of my changes, I can see the update of these workflows. So again, I didn't have to leave my code space to see the workflows, but to show you all, that's what I want to do. So I can look at them, I can see what's happened to it, I can look at all the steps that I analyzed, and I can see that the job completed. I can also check in on our existing deploy environment. I can see it's running run number 13, and it's on this step. So I can see that once deployed to test, I can see all those steps in that actions workflow from this panel here. So I don't actually have to leave this workspace. I can continue writing code, I can continue doing other things, and wait till everything's running. So looking at this, it has deployed to our test environment. So you guys ready to see if our website's running? Let's see if I broke it. That is production. Here we go. So it's gone to test. It's deployed. Is everyone happy with it? Let's see if GitHub CoPilot chat can fix that. So I made a boo-boo in my code. Everyone up here, the folks in the front caught it. Does everyone see where I've made my boo-boo? I put an extra exclamation point. I might need to add linting to my actions workflows. Maybe. So let's see if GitHub CoPilot can find that error. So I'm going to use GitHub CoPilot chat. So I'm going to highlight this code and say, hi, CoPilot. Can you fix my code? So when Scott was up here talking earlier about GitHub CoPilot, I know it doesn't. Inherently, it's not wrong, right? It's just a typo. So when Scott was talking about AI, he was really focusing on context. You have to be very literal with CoPilot, Bing Chat, any of those, or ChatGPT. So I'm just going to go ahead and take out my extra exclamation. Yep. So I'm going to go ahead and paste this in. What is wrong with this code? Oh. All right, so CoPilot chat found it for me. That's good. So I'm going to keep my cursor where it is. And at CoPilot chat here, there's a little, it's hard to see for you all probably. Ooh, let me try and bring it down. It's hard to zoom in on chat. Let me see if I can make it bigger. There we go. These two little rectangular things, it's going to go ahead and insert my code for me. Let's see if it did it properly. Oh, it went over top. We're doing well today, aren't we? Right, there we go. So, yeah, maybe I don't want to submit my code. Let's re-push it. All right, so the good news is we found that in test. That's why we have the human check, right? Because Mish found that for me. Thank you, Mish. I usually make a mistake in every single demo I do. It's kind of the fun, right? Get to use all tools. So everything's going to deploy again. Let's see if we can see it in our actions. Yeah. There we go. So it's going to redo everything. It's going to re-push our Docker image to a better image and then redeploy to test, and then we can recheck it again. I don't really want to wait on that because I have the patience of a goldfish. So let's go back and see what our code's doing. So if we're back in here, in our actions, let's go ahead and rerun this and see what it's doing. It's thinking about working. The other cool thing about using my code space is I can see my environment settings. So if I go into, I'm just going to open up the GitHub Actions workflow that I'm running. So this is the actual YAML file, and I know everyone loves YAML. That is running those actions right now. When I am running that action, does everyone see how on lines 29, 30, and 31, I have no passwords in my code? right? So what am I using? I'm using GitHub Secrets. Now, again, we're deploying to Azure. We could absolutely use an Azure Key Vault. We could use another third-party tool. But I'm going to go ahead and deploy this using my GitHub Secrets. So if I go into Secrets here, and I click on Actions, I have a ton of secrets. So anytime I need to put a password in my code, I put it in as a secret. I have two different types of secrets. I have repository secrets. This is kind of for anything that is in that Actions workflow, in that repository. That's all going through. So my Azure subscription ID, all my credentials are all going to be saved in there. The other cool thing I have are these things called environments. So how do we protect production in a true CI/CD form? We set up environments. So each environment here has its own environment secret. So if I go to environments, we can see that I have a production environment, staging environment, and a test environment. These absolutely match with each Azure web app that's deployed. So I have lots of customers that have different compliance requirements, and a lot of times that is segmenting out your keys into different environments. Just because if you do get a breach in production, they're not going to get your keys for staging or your test environment in hopes, right? So I'm using environments here, and each environment has its own set of rules. So my production environment is protected. I'm requiring reviewers. I'm going to require myself. I can add Mish. Maybe. Oh, you're not in my repo. I'm sorry. You don't have access. Denied. If she had access to this repository, I'd add her a reviewer. The other thing I do is add a wait timer. So that's how I have all these stages set up in my pipeline. The other thing I've done is, you probably shouldn't tick that box, but I've done that for myself. But then we can see my environment secrets here. So they are separate, and I can see them from the secrets list as well. So I've segmented out those environments. I can also throw in my environment variables here that are specific to each of those environments. So not only have I worked from a different development environment where I can see everything, I've segmented everything out using the GitHub Actions workflow into environments to protect my production environment. So if we see what everything's doing, yep, I got to review my deployment again to test. And it will go ahead and deploy to that test environment. So what have we done today? We've stood up some code. We've deployed some stuff to Azure. Actually, the other thing I'm going to show you is in my workflow files. Oops, sorry. Trying to zoom in and out for you all. So everything I'm deploying is traceable. And why do we need traceability? Because if something's wrong, we need to be able to revert it. In line 231 here, I tag all of my Docker images. Sorry, this is having a heyday. Come on. With the GitHub SHA on every deployment. So I have the GitHub SHA that's tagged onto my image into my Azure Container Registry. So if I go into my Azure Container Registry here, and I just give this a refresh, I can see that I've deployed a few things from 326 and 339, and I have the SHA code here to match. So with those SHA codes, I can trace exactly every time I've pushed an image into my Azure Container Registry, the health of that, and I can see the health by hooking in Defender for Cloud, and I haven't fully set this up. But the good news is I have no recommendations and no failures in my Azure Container Registry today. Now that will change as updates happen, but I have full visibility. I have ways to revert everything. I've protected everything as it goes through my pipeline, and I've protected my development environment. So let's see if everything's still deploying. So I will be really honest and open. My test environment, my staging, and my production are 3 identical environments. The configurations are the same. Back in the day, I say back in the day, before the cloud, prior to me working in the cloud in 2013, I very often worked with customers where DevTest was a dusty box in the corner. And it was not similar to production. So if I'm not testing like for like, bugs are going to happen. Things are not going to work. Hardware is going to fail. So I have set up 3 identical environments, and the deploy environments are identical in each of those 3, so that when I go to my test environment and I go to my staging, I know exactly what's going to happen in production. So it shouldn't fail in production unless something has changed. So now that this is deployed to test, let's see if I actually can type today. See, I'm preemptively clicking because I know it's going to work. There we go. And it's fixed. All right. So I've protected my production environment. I've put all my keys somewhere really safe. I've done all these things. I've developed in a secure way. Am I missing anything? Cake. I'm missing cake, yeah. One thing I do want to try, because I like doing things on the fly, I have something called push protection enabled with GitHub Advanced Security. So remember, I can do secret scanning in my repository, but I've already pushed that secret up. So if that secret's there, I have to do a lot of hard work to take it out, because that secret's going to live for forever. So I'm going to go into my terminal here. Let me just zoom out. I'm going to go ahead and change a password in this file, or take a secret out and put in a password, because I like living dangerously. So in my Azure login here, I'm just going to go ahead and take out the secret credentials, and we're just going to type in a random password. Let's see what happens if I go to Git, stage my changes. It looks better in the terminal than the other bit. Let's see if it stops it. So my push protection did not work in a code space. That's good. All right. That didn't work as I wanted it to. Anyways, so we have our changes. Should we approve our changes to our staging environment and see if it runs? Good shout. So this is going to run through. It's going to run identical to test. The only reason why it should be failing is if, excuse me, Azure has an outage, which never happens. GitHub has an outage. That also never happens. We never have outages at GitHub. But we can see it run through. It's going to run through the exact same steps that it ran through in test. There are 3 identical environments. And if we see here, line 11, we can see that SHA code after the image tag. So I can go into my Azure Container Registry, look up that exact SHA code, and make sure they're identical. Yes, it is. It wasn't on CodeQL. They've removed it. So in CodeQL, you used to be able to show the workflow file, which I was going to show you all, and I do apologize. It's not there. We'll work on that for next time. While this is running, does anyone have any questions? Yes?
So if someone were to want to copy that repo, say it was open source, how do you manage all the secrets then?
So he asked the question, if someone wanted to copy the repo if it's open source. Now, when you say copy, do you mean fork, star? So if I'm going to fork this repository, those secrets do not exist. They stay in my repository. Correct. So if you were to fork this repository, you'll have to go through and set up the secrets yourself, because you also have to set up a few things. The Azure authentication, because you're going to go to your Azure account and not mine. I'm not paying for your billing. Because my credit card limit's really small. And GitHub doesn't pay for my Azure subscription. Okay, well, we'll use your subscription then. Anyways, so you will have to fill out all those secrets yourself. The GitHub repository secrets, you have to self-manage. So for instance, if you have developers on your team that need to put secrets into their code, any kind of like secrets or keys into their code, they can't see the secrets. So when I go into those secrets, I actually can't view them. I can only see that there's a secret assigned. So you will have to go through the YAML and then create your own. So let's go ahead and review our deployment. That needs to go to production, but we need to test our staging environment first. Let me go ahead and find our staging environment. There's also, there we go, that worked. So we've gone to all our different environments. We can now go to production. The other cool thing I had in my pipeline, which isn't working because we've made a change to the action, is it actually would spit out the URL of the website in my actions workflow, but it's now, GitHub now thinks it's a secret and it's hidden it, so that's handy. So that broke this morning. But anyways, so yeah, we've done all the secure things. We've developed from a secure environment. We've deployed to Azure. We've used secrets. We have used environments to protect our production environment. We've deployed to production. We're using Azure Container Registry. We're scanning our registry. We didn't find any issues. and we deployed our website. So all we need to do is go to the production environment, and we're good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor to questions, and I also might have some free swag for people that ask questions. George might get a T-shirt. The question was, did it pick up the secret? Let's have a look. No. The question was why. A couple reasons. So I usually pre-bake a fake secret in that sometimes so secret scanning only covers certain types of secrets. Okay? We have a list of supported things. I don't think I used a long enough password for it to trigger, which is concerning. Well, apparently in this case, the less secure password was better. It does need to be triggered by certain things, and I'm not sure why it didn't pick it up. So that's definitely a bug we'll work on. I've actually, and I'll be honest, I've actually had trouble with that happening in a GitHub code space. So if I run it from VS Code, I find it works much, much better. I almost wonder if we have to reload the GitHub code space to get it to pick up the change in policy. I'm not sure, but I've had that issue repeatedly from a GitHub code space. But from VS Code, absolutely, it will pick up the secret scanning issue from the push on the pull request, when you push your code up. And you get a T-shirt. So actually, I'll hand them out after because it's faffy. So come up afterward and get a T-shirt. Yes, gentleman with the hat. Can you come up and ask that again? Sorry, it's very hard to hear you.
Can you show how I can find an overview of what part of my code is deployed at which time at a given time?
Which part of your code is deployed?
Yeah, so say for example, I have version A deployed in test and I have version C deployed in production because of reasons.
Yep.
And now I want to know what's actually deployed where before I start doing it.
So
Look at the workflows, I see code reasons, but that doesn't necessarily show what's deployed in which environment.
So the question was, if you have different versions of your code and you want to put them to different environments. So there's a couple ways we can achieve that. So I'm using environments to protect my production and using gates. You can use canary deployments, you can use A/B testing, you can do parallel deploys, and you can tag it with each version. So you can actually add a tag in your deployment and add that tag to your workflow file so it outputs that and you can see the version. So there's a few ways to do it depending on how you want to do your deployment methodologies. So let's say, or you could just add that tag to anytime you do a new deployment for a major feature release. There's also a feature thing you can add to the pull request and the issue as well to tag it, but then you can tag it in the actions workflow when you're doing a major feature release. Does that make sense?
So the experience I have is that sometimes it's not always a newer version. Sometimes we'll have to previous.
Right, so if you're using a different version, you can absolutely output that in your actions workflow. You can put that as like an output. So I wish I could show you how I have an output, but you can put it as an out on your actions workflow so it appears when it actually gets deployed what version it is.
But if I want to see an overview over multiple environments, say where it says, all right, in the test environment you have deployed commit number 1 or 2, and production is actually commit number 1 because we know something bad is trying something out. That overview, I suspect you have something that doesn't require to go and look at each individual workflow.
So I've used, what? Yeah, because I've done it with tags.
Yep. If you go to the code tab, sorry.
No, it's fine. I've done it with tags before, but I'm taking advice from another expert, which is fine.
On the right, you scroll down to releases,
Yes, and add to the releases tag.
and then deployments is under that.
Yes.
Sorry, so go back. Sorry.
Oops.
Under deployments, those are your environments. And then you can click into those and see the deployments.
But how does he add the tag for the different versions?
Well, that will be what's in each environment. Most releases will correspond to each environment. So go back one again. There was a test deployment 15 minutes ago.
Yeah.
Know what version that was? I see what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've added tags onto my deployments. Would you do it another way?
No, probably not. But I mean, that shows you, it gives you a link, deep link to the last.
Yeah. So I've added a tag to my deployment so I can see the tag with the version number so I can do a major minor release. Yeah. So does that make sense? Okay. And we can probably get a visual for you later, not when I'm on stage. I can add some tags and show it to you later if that's okay. Yeah. But I use tags, but yeah. But you can get a better view of it. But yeah, I'm a big tag fan. That's me. The question over there? So the question was to, with GitHub CoPilot chat, if I ask it to fix something in a previous comment, does it remember previous things? So it remembers that open tab, or remember it sees the highlighted text that I have. So it's looking at the file that's open, and Scott touched on as well. It's more of a guardrail, right? If it could see all of your code and remember it, there's probably some legality issues that a lot of organizations are going to have issue with. So it's whatever's your open tab or highlighted code. So when I've switched between my infrastructure as code to my HTML file before, I've had to reopen the tab, re-highlight, and even just put a code snippet in, or say, in this, I have to be really specific in the context, like in this file, how do I do this? And that's how I've usually achieved it. Because sometimes we do flip-flop between files quite a bit. With chat, you still have to be really precise on the context. And if you're going to switch context to another type of file, you just have to be careful if you're going back and forth a lot. But I know there's always dependencies between files. Yes? So the question was how to bring up a commit from the history to a test environment.
Yeah, deploy it from a Git commit histories, select a commit, and put it into one of your environments. Because right now you are doing it through workflow, right? It only triggers that. Is there a way to say, okay, I just want to test again this particular commit, how did it look, or revert back to
So you want to revert to a previous commit? Absolutely. Is the commit already merged? Or is it in a working branch?
I'm assuming it's in a master branch. It's one of the master branches.
If it's already gone into the main branch, I would probably open a new pull request and retest it net new. From a developer point of view, from a bug point of view, that's probably what I've done in the past. If it's a previous commit, we have that traceability, but we want to retest it, I would open up a PR and rerun the tests again. But that was also kind of a working practice our engineering team had. So any even existing code we retested would become a new issue, or a new issue in this case, and we'd open up a new PR on it because it would be a task in our backlog. Any other questions? And anyone who asks questions, come get a shirt at the end. Yes, sir. Absolutely. So the question was, this gentleman has 20 to 30 repos, and then they want to define environments in every single repo. Scalability, absolutely. Template your repositories. I have worked with some very large customers that use Terraform, template their repositories, and when they get, because they're an MSP, and they're deploying to multiple customers, they have a template file they work from, and they have 3,000 repositories, and they use environments and secrets. So they just get into a template, redeploy it, they have a base template, and then they can modify it from there. So it's, again, determining what you require for every single project, setting up some standards, some good engineering best practices, putting that into a template, and then deploying that out. Yes? I'm going to look at that now. What did I do? So the comment was about how I declared my secret. Yes, you're right. So that's why I usually copy and paste a working length secret. So I bet if I save that again and try it again, it might work. Let's see if we can, whoops. Thank you for catching that. That's a little bit why it's good to pre-bake things when you have a known working issue. Okay. But we got to find the bugs, right? Anyone else? All right. I'm going to leave you all with a couple resources because we all like some resources and some reading. If you all have any questions, come find me. Reach out to me on Twitter or LinkedIn. GitHub CoPilot, all the stuff that we kind of didn't go into today, we have some great documentation on. You can sign up for usage on it. GitHub blog is where we literally announce all our new products and features. And then anything you want to know on a new feature, please submit into the community repos or an issue about something, seeing something on a roadmap. But we do publish all of our roadmaps publicly because we're very transparent about what's coming down the pipeline. And we have GitHub Universe coming in November. We're going to have lots of cool, amazing stuff coming out. But please do come find me, Mish Manners, or Damo here, and we will answer any and all of your GitHub questions. So thank you all.